How's it going, guys and gals? As always, my name is Matt. Welcome to Matty Outdoors. In today's video, we are going to talk about some key tips for beginner backpackers that are also going to be relevant for the experienced backpackers out there. So if you guys have been backpacking for a year or for a couple seasons now, there's probably going to be some tips in this video that help you guys out going forward, be it ways to shave some weight out of your backpack or make life a little bit more comfortable for you guys out on trail. That is what my channel is all about. So if that sounds like something that interests you guys, click on the subscribe button over here. Like I said, my channel is all about helping you shave weight out of your backpack, make your experience out on trail a lot more comfortable, make it a lot more enjoyable. And with that said, let's dive into these tips. Tip number one has to do with your mentality. And when I say that, I mean your mentality towards backpacking. Now, I'm sure everybody has heard someone say the phrase, hike your own hike. And that's pretty much what we are going to talk about when it comes to mentality. Now, the important part to remember when it comes to mentality is backpacking is whatever you want it to be. Whether you are just a weekend warrior and you like going out on shorter distance trips and you like taking fresh food and taking steaks and potatoes with you and carrying more luxury items, or if you're a weekend warrior who likes to go out for 4 to 5 day trips and you kind of like to put on heavier miles, but you're not quite at that stage where you want to do through hiking, and through hikers kind of seem to be the pinnacle of backpackers. And I've been backpacking for 20 years and the longest backpacking trip that I've ever done has been 9 days. I've never had the chance to go do any through hiking, and honestly I've never actually really had the desire to just go and hike for months and months at a time. I live my life at home and I use backpacking kind of as my way to get out and escape and kind of reconnect with things that are important to me. So like I said, backpacking is whatever you want it to be. If you're not a through hiker and you're somebody that's only able to get away for, say, one night a month or, a couple nights throughout the summer, it's still backpacking. And at the end of the day, the important part is you're still getting out there. So don't let yourself get discouraged. Don't let yourself think that you are not a backpacker and you don't belong. If you're getting out and you're doing it, you're one of us, you absolutely belong, and that's what matters. Dive into tip number two. It kind of ties back into tip number one, and tip number two has to do with your gear, and not so much worrying about the gear that you take with you and more trying to focus on the experience that you're going to have and just immersing yourself in the experience of backpacking as a whole. Now, this may be hard for some to grasp because a guy who carries some pretty expensive, pretty pricey, big name backpacking gear on almost all my backpacking trips is going to sit here and tell you guys that honestly, the gear really doesn't matter. To get out on a backpacking trip, you definitely do not need, a $400 to $500 DCF tent or, a $500 DCF Cuban fiber hammock tarp to cover your hammock when you're sleeping at night. So if you're someone who's looking at getting started in backpacking, don't shy away from the thought of backpacking because you think you're going to need the really expensive gear. There's a lot of people out there on trail who are getting by just fine, and they're sourcing out their gear from places like Facebook Marketplace and Kijiji, and picking up surplus stuff or clearance stuff. I do a lot of deal shopping myself. It's very, very rare that I tend to spend full price for any of my backpacking gear. I almost always wait for a sale. I'm pretty frugal when it comes to money like that. So if you are somebody getting started out, like I said, don't worry so much about the gear that you're using. If you guys fall in love with backpacking and backpacking becomes a passion of yours, I can almost guarantee you guys are going to end up like me, where the upgrades to your gear just inevitably start to happen, and they happen over time, and sooner or later you're going to end up with one of those pricey backpacking gear loadouts, but almost nobody starts out like that. So like I said, the gear really doesn't matter. Tip number three has to do when we are out there on trail, and that is simply respecting the places that we go and hike. If you guys have never heard of the term leave no trace, or LNT, I highly suggest you guys go to the description box down below, where I'm going to put some links to different resources to give you guys some information on leave no trace principles. Some of it is really, really basic stuff, like how to properly dispose of your number two or your poop or your boom boom or whatever you want to call it, when you're taking a dump out in the woods, just being able to properly dispose that, and, being able to properly deal with your garbage that you may create when you're out there on trail. and, you know, minimizing your impacts when we're out there on trail. I'm not going to sit here and rant about leave no trace. That could be an entire video series all in itself. But like I said, I will put some links in the description box down below where you guys can find some more information about that and why it is so important to follow L&T principles. Now for tip number 4, I'm going to pull my backpack out here. And tip number 4 is not the backpack itself. Tip number 4 is actually how we load our backpack. Now, when it comes to loading your backpack, the big thing that you want to think about is what items do I want to have access to at certain points throughout the day. Things that you're going to want easy access to throughout the day are things like your water filter, your snacks you might use throughout the day, your rain jacket, maybe your sit pad if you plan on stopping and taking a couple breaks throughout the day of hiking. Most backpacks, and this is not all, but like I said, most backpacks out there have some sort of external pockets, and you know, the Ospreys and a lot of these more ultralight backpacks have these little stretchy mesh pockets on the outside, and these are great for storing things like I said, your water filter, your sit pad, your rain jacket, things that you're going to want to have easy access to. So when it comes to packing your pack, that's kind of one of the first things that I always think about when it comes to loading things into my pack is sort of the order of importance on when I'm going to need these things. So things like my sleeping gear, you know, like my quilts and my sleeping pad or my underquilt or my hammock, those are not things that I'm going to need out there on trail at any point in time. So those are usually the first things that go into my backpack because they're going to be the last things I'm going to pull out of my backpack. Now with that said, one of the most important things that you're going to put into your backpack is going to be your shelter system, be it your tent, or if you're a hammocker like myself, your tarp. A big mistake I see a lot of beginner backpackers making when it comes to where they put their tent in their backpack is just stuffing it down with all their sleeping gear and their clothes, and then they get to camp and all of a sudden it's raining and you're going to dig through your backpack and you're in the rain and you're exposing all that gear like your down quilts and your clothes to the elements and potentially getting them wet. And one of those things that you want to think about is where can I put my shelter system where I could have a nice easy access to it. And for me, the spot that I store either my tarp or my tent is right on the very top. It's always the last thing that goes in my backpack at the very top. And it just makes it so when I get to camp, if it's raining or there's weather coming in, I can easily get my shelter system out, get that set up, throw all my gear inside, and then I have a nice dry place to go through my gear, and I'm not risking getting any of my important gear wet. Going into tip number 5, it's going to tie in a little bit to what we just talked about for the importance of gear and where we place it in our backpack. Like I mentioned, some of the gear that is not going to be as important when I'm out there on trail is stuff like my sleeping setup. And the importance of your sleeping setup is making sure that you've got the properly rated insulation for the temperatures that you're going to be dealing with. Whether you're using a quilt or a sleeping bag, it honestly does not matter. This is going to apply to both. And the important factor to look into is when you are picking out a sleeping bag or a quilt, you need to look at the rating system that they advertise the sleeping bag or quilt as, and make sure that you are selecting a quilt or sleeping bag based on the comfort rating. Now, most sleeping bag manufacturers will advertise their quilts at the survival or the limit rating. The survival rating on a sleeping bag is pretty self-explanatory. That is the temperature rating that you will basically get through the night. You're not going to be comfortable. You're probably going to wake up a little bit chilled, but you're not going to die essentially. Now, the comfort rating of your sleeping bag is the temperature rating where essentially you can be down to just your skivvies and you should be pretty toasty warm and get yourself through the night comfortably. Now, why sleeping bag manufacturers advertise the survival rating on their sleeping bag? The only logical explanation I can give you guys is they're simply trying to make you think you're buying a warmer bag than you really are. And it's unfortunate and it gets a lot of people in trouble, but it's just one of those things that we as consumers need to know about and we need to be aware about, and we definitely need to look into when we're picking up a sleeping bag. Tip number 6 here requires 2 hands because I've only got 5 fingers on one hand. And with tip number 6, we are going to help you guys shave some bulk and some weight out of your backpack. And it's pretty easy to do when you start looking at what pieces of gear can I use for multi-purpose. As we talk multi-purpose gear, I'm just going to give you guys 2 quick examples of 2 pieces of gear that I use for multi-purpose on every single backpacking trip I go on. Right here, I've got my trash compactor bag. Now this is just a contractor grade garbage bag. It goes inside my backpack and I put any of the gear that I need to keep dry, stuff like my sleeping quilts and my clothes and my hammock, and just like I said, any gear that needs to stay dry goes inside this trash compactor bag. The top gets rolled up, and then I don't worry about it. I can go and I can ford rivers, and I can walk through some torrential downpours, and I know that all the gear inside this garbage bag is going to stay dry. And the reason I specifically go with a contractor grade garbage bag is I primarily sleep in a hammock, and this actually doubles as a ground sheet. So I will take this out of my pack and I'll lay it underneath my hammock, and then I can put my pack on top of it, and put any of my gear on top that I want to keep off the ground and keep out of the dirt. Or I can also take my backpack and fit my pack inside here for a little extra protection, especially if you're dealing with some rain and some wind, and you got some wind whipping underneath the tarp and stuff like that. Just ensures that all my gear stays dry. And you probably noticed in my other hand, my accordion style Z seat. Now I use the Thermarest Z seat, and this piece of gear goes with me on every single backpacking trip. And it serves so many different functions for me. Besides just being a sit pad, I'll pull this out of my backpack, have it folded in half, I'll plop it down on a log or a rock, or even just pop it down on the ground. Gives me something nice to kneel on or to sit on. Gives me a little bit of insulation from the cold ground. I also use this, to fan a fire. These work extremely well. When you're trying to get a fire going, you've got some coals, you throw some sticks on and just wave it in front of there. It works great for fanning a fire. You can use this as a windscreen if you don't carry a windscreen with your stove. I used to use this all the time when I was using my BRS stove. The only knock I could ever say about the BRS stove is it's pretty susceptible to wind, and a lot of times I will just prop the Z seat up around there and gives you a nice windbreak. Being a hammock camper, this also doubles as part of my sleep system. I will tuck this into the footbox of my top quilt, and I only use a partial underquilt. So the underquilt that hangs underneath my hammock goes to the back of my knees. This is what keeps my heels and my calves warm when I'm sleeping at night. So just another way that this becomes a multi-purpose piece of gear and helps me cut out some bulk and helps me cut out some weight out of my backpack. And as we're talking cutting bulk and weight out of my backpack, what I'm going to do for you guys is fire up a playlist full of weight-saving backpacking tips. So when you guys are done with this video, find a video in that playlist, check it out. And as always, I'm Matty. Thank you so dang much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.